today we're going to talk about loneliness. And this is a topic that I'm really looking forward to hashing out with you,
Okay.
just because of how often it comes up.
Love the phrase hashing out, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah. So I hope that we could really dig into it and expand it, because loneliness is something that I'm talking to people about every single day.
Yeah.
It comes up. People are experiencing a sort of an emptiness, but a loneliness where they feel like they don't have anybody. They feel like they're going through the world and nobody necessarily would know if they exist or don't exist. But then I also see really busy people who say they feel tremendously lonely.
Right.
And so it's kind of interesting for me to have it on such a large span,
Right.
where on the one hand, those that it would make sense for them to be lonely are feeling loneliness, but then those that I would anticipate that they feel less lonely are still telling me that they feel lonely. And so that got me thinking of why we should really start this podcast today, to really understand how loneliness comes up, what it is, and potentially what we can do about it.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great conversation. It's a really important topic. I think also loneliness causes many problems.
Yes.
I didn't do the research on it, but I'm assuming that loneliness is a big factor for physical and mental health and a lot of other conditions.
For sure. Like, it can lead to more depression, anxiety. It can lead also just to physical health, any physical health symptoms. So it is something that is important.
Yeah. You know what, kind of the problem with this is that usually when people are in the position where they need people the most, that's when they're in the most loneliness. Now, you're saying not always. You're saying there's a lot of people that are, efficient and working a lot and busy and they're still feeling lonely, but we'll put that aside and talk about that later. But I think that many times people who are in a position, maybe they're suffering from a little bit of anxiety or depression, they're the ones who are also the most lonely.
Right. It can be across the board.
Right.
And so I think, like, when we think about who is affected by loneliness, the answer is everybody.
Yeah.
Lonely is an emotion.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like a condition. I think we think of loneliness as it has this stigma of stay away. I can't say I'm lonely, or I have to always be social.
Right.
But lonely is really, it's an emotional experience.
Right. It's a flaw to say you're lonely.
Right. Like, what's wrong with you that you're feeling lonely? You're doing something off that you're feeling that way.
It's like it's your fault in a way. I feel like it has that kind of stigma that your fault. Socialize more, have more friends. Obviously, you're doing something wrong if you can't have friends and you're feeling lonely.
Right. And I think many successful people feel lonely.
Yeah.
Everybody feels lonely at sometimes. So it's not necessarily that you're doing something wrong. It's actually part of the emotional experience that we maybe don't give ourselves permission to feel or understand the value in lonely.
Yeah, I know for myself, like, the feeling of loneliness comes up for me when I'm, let's say, in a situation where I can use help and I feel that I don't have anyone to call. Either because my mother is busy or my friend is just not around or I don't feel comfortable asking. That's when the loneliness hits me. And then I'm like, wait, where's my support system right now? I need a little bit of help because for whatever reason.
Right. And that's where you start questioning, like, am I lonely? Like, what's going on here? And that you have those social supports, but just at that moment that they can't show up.
Right.
That's where the lonely can come. And I think also lonely can come when we feel that the environment around us doesn't understand us.
Right.
Or the environment around us isn't aware of who we are. Or they're not interested in the things we're interested. So that's like more of an emotional loneliness.
Right.
So it's not that you're alone. There could be a tremendous amount of people around you, but you feel alone or lonely in your thoughts.
Right.
You feel lonely in your existence. And that is such a deep pain. So much so that I loved, I was discussing this with a friend, and she said, lonely is such a visceral experience. You feel it in your body. Like, when someone is at an extreme level of loneliness.
Like a pain in the heart.
Yeah, you feel your heart and you feel your body to be so heavy. Like, it's hard to get out of bed. Like, you feel glued to the ground. Like, it's just a visceral experience, which is a powerful emotion, therefore, over the body.
Yeah, wow. That's, like, really well said.
Yeah, and I think, like, a lot of the times that comes from being disconnected from yourself. Being disconnected from your purpose, being disconnected from what you hold to be true, or not even knowing yourself.
Right.
Because if you don't know what you need, how are you then going to know?
Right, because then you think you're surrounding around with family and with friends and doing fun activities, and yet the feeling of loneliness is still there. It's because you might be connecting in the wrong way.
Exactly. And you have to know how you connect. You have to know what makes you feel less lonely or more lonely.
So this kind of ties back into identity a little bit.
Yes. Which is kind of funny, right? How, like, if you don't have an identity, you might experience more loneliness.
Right.
Like, I wonder if, like, we would speak to those that are feeling loneliness more frequently, right? Because everybody will experience it. But if you're experiencing it too much, that it's leading either into a depression, does that come back to the question of who are you?
Right.
Do you know yourself? Do you know what you need in order to get rid of that loneliness?
Yeah.
Because generally, like lonely, like every emotion, is an indication to go out and socialize more. Or maybe it's a time to fill yourself up. It's like, you're a sponge. Sometimes we're filling ourselves up with things like reading or ideas or thinking.
Right.
But other times then we're squeezing the sponge out, where we're extracting, we're connecting, we're giving our ideas to other people, we're connecting. But then it's sort of like take in, give
Right.
out. Take in, give out. But if we're finding ourselves too much to be taking in and there's nowhere to give it out, we have to
Right.
know
Exactly.
where it is to give it out to.
Yeah, to the right connection. Because I think that someone can fill up their day and feel like, well, but I am socializing. Like I went to the gym and I talked to the lady next to me, and then I went to work, and then I went, for lunch with my colleagues, and then I did Target afterwards. So I'm doing all these things where I'm so social, but it's like, were you in a meaningful, connective relationship in that day that fulfilled you?
Right. I think it's almost like you're busy, but you're empty.
Right.
You're extremely busy with all these errands, and you might have been around a lot of people, and you might be doing a lot of things and have a lot of plans, but like, are you actually connected to the things that you're doing?
Right. And I think sometimes it is enough. Like, I guess it depends. I feel like every day we can have a different amount that we need to fill our loneliness part of us.
Mm-hmm.
And some days we just need to talk to the lady at the gym.
Right.
And other days we need to go to the gym with our friend.
Right. Your capacity each day is different.
Capacity, that's the word. I'm like,
Yeah.
using my hands. Capacity.
Well, sometimes using your hands is good, right? You did
Right.
it enough for me to understand what it was that you're saying non-verbally.
Right. So the capacity,
Yeah.
right. So some days we need more connection and some days we need less connection. And I guess it's tuning into the need and making sure you fulfill that need if you wake up one day or it just hits you at a certain point for whatever, different circumstances that make it come up for you. And you're like, wow, I need to go out for dinner with a good friend right now. I need a meaningful connection.
Mm-hmm.
Versus other times you're like, I just need to see people because I've been working all day at home. But like it doesn't need, I don't, and in fact, I don't want it to be meaningful.
Right.
Because I'm tired.
So this goes back to what do you need?
Right.
Right.
Which goes back to knowing yourself, which
knowing
goes back
the
to your
needs.
identity.
Right. And within time, there's a certain frequency like of things that happened. Like it's consistent, where you start to trust, hey, every single time that I was lonely, this is what helped me. And every time that I tried this thing, it didn't help.
Right.
Right. And so therefore you should learn from experience what fills you and what doesn't fill you. So when you start to feel that visceral experience of, oh, I'm getting lonely or I'm
Right.
craving a person, then you know what to do already.
Right.
Without having to think much about it. You've done the preparation beforehand.
Right. And you don't need to let it get it so bad also.
Right. I remember at a certain point where, in my life where I started feeling more lonely, and I didn't realize why, because I was working and I was busy and I was experiencing it more than just once in a while. I was feeling deeply lonely. And I recognized that at that point, I was talking to a lot of people on the phone and I was talking to a lot of people over Zoom, but I wasn't hanging out in person with anybody.
Right. Was that during COVID maybe?
It was. It was.
When
It
the whole
happens to
world
be.
was not hanging out in
There was
person?
something. It's funny because I didn't feel lonely during COVID because I felt like everybody was
was in it.
experiencing the same thing. So it's not like I'm having FOMO. Everyone is
Right.
out there doing this. So I actually didn't, shockingly enough, feel lonely. It's when everyone is out and about, that's when I think I
Right.
start to experience it more. And that's when I realized I have a need to be with someone physically there. I have a need to go out and not just talk to somebody on the phone and not see
Right.
them, not to just like Zoom someone. Like you need to feel them near you
Yeah. That
and
makes
to do
sense.
things together. So that's important also of recognizing like what's off,
Right.
what's wrong, and how can I then fill it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Like sometimes people are like getting connection. They're like, oh, but I'm texting my friend all day and I'm speaking at night on the phone. But it's like, wait, maybe we need to go out together and feel like another person's physical presence.
Right. Yeah. Like, and to be in their surroundings. I think also like people will say like, I need to remove my loneliness. I need to get rid of it. I need to never experience this. And I don't think that's
Right.
fair.
It's a part of us.
Right. It's just there. It exists. It's a part of you, and
Yeah.
you're gonna have it. It's normal. Like sort of like normalizing lonely. Obviously, when it gets too much and
Right.
you feel like you're isolating yourself, or you feel like you have nobody in the world,
Right.
that's a problem. But a little loneliness here and there, it's not necessarily bad. It can bring you to even better places.
Yeah. It reminds us that we're human.
Right. And I remember talking to somebody and who was saying that their day was just not filled enough, and they feel like they're just trying to do things to fill their day. And they were saying it with like a negative twist. And I was thinking, what's wrong with that? Aren't we all
Right.
doing that? Like
Right.
our job is to keep
Ultimately.
ourselves, ultimately, that's what we're all doing. We're just
Right.
finding things to occupy our time with. And we hope that those things are more meaningful rather than
Right.
less meaningful. But there's not, when you break it down, like it can sound like, oh, I'm just like filling my time up. But
Right.
yeah, that is what we're doing, as awful as it sounds.
Right. I wonder if we fill our time with more meaningful things that we do that also combats loneliness to an extent. So even if you're not having meaningful connections all day, through your meaningful activities or your meaningful work, whether it's to yourself or to the community, that makes you just feel part of something greater than yourself. And I feel like that takes away loneliness. I think people isolated in their own world, doing maybe a job where it's very like, you don't feel a connection to it, or it's not for a greater purpose, you're kind of living your own life. But when we connect to society as a whole, which is why they always say, like, if you're having a difficult time, you're feeling sad, you're feeling lonely, give back to the community, go and do a food drive, go and pack some clothing up for people.
Be a part of something and belong.
Because then there's a belonging. Yeah. And belonging maybe is the antidote to loneliness. Yeah. You know, I always like to find the one word that's the antidote. Yeah. For now, we can say belonging is the antidote.
I really like
to
that.
Loneliness, connecting to others, but even more than that, connecting to community as a whole.
Right. And so with loneliness, like, we don't necessarily need to combat it with belonging to another person or belonging to a community. I want to just add on that we can feel connected to a thing. Yeah. Feel connected to an object. Feel connected to a certain society, even if that society is not active at that moment where you're not with them, but just knowing that you have that place. But I think, like, usually when I think of lonely, it's like, oh, so go be with people. Right. But it's not necessarily people. Like, you might need a thing, you might need an item, you might need an activity. And it happens to be 2 weeks ago, the library by me, they were hosting like some photography thing. And so I went to pick up a few books. And then afterwards I saw on the calendar that they were having like a photography, like they said, come bring your phone, learn how to use your camera. And I have zero experience with photography, but I know in the past there's been courses and I've heard people speak about it. So I said, you know, why not try it? Like, I had a need to try something new. I think I was probably like, you know, the only Jewish person sitting there, probably the youngest person sitting there in the library. Exactly. And so I sat there, and this was a phenomenal photographer, and she was showing, like, you know, just the rule of thirds of how to take a photo and lighting, and how a picture came to be, like the back end of it. I always like appreciate that. You sometimes can see that on Instagram where it's like the end product of the picture versus like the background. And I remember like sitting in the room knowing nobody, like, and so it could have been a very lonely experience because I'm not connected to anybody, to the facilitator or to these other individuals, but I felt like so connected, just like learning so much about this woman's life and her career. Right. And so like that was just like eye-opening for me.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point about connecting to something else. It doesn't always have to be people, because sometimes people isn't what we need and is also not available to us.
Right. And the second piece is not always available to us. And as life goes on, right, in elementary school, high school, you're together. But afterwards, your life and your friendships, like we've spoken about in other podcasts, it's not a given that you're going to have people around you. And so some of the time we have to fill our time up with things that we can do ourselves. Right. And be more connected to us and have like self projects or self activities or self interest that don't rely on another person always, because there's not always another person to be available.
Yeah. And I think what's cool about, let's say, the library idea, and it's not so trending, let's say, for people to go.
Are you calling me not cool?
Yeah, kind of. But I'm saying technically, in theory, it was a cool idea, because that's a place where you can go, you can meet people, you can do an activity, and you're just connecting to the community as well. Right. So there's nothing really like that. You know, kind of when we talked about friends, like where can you meet people if you're trying to meet new people? There's not really so many opportunities like that. But in our 60s, we can go take a photography course together at the library. I don't know if I'm like down to do that right now. But my point is the idea of it. Like if there's like this kind of community center, like drop in, have a good time with people. Yeah. Fill it with meaningful connection.
Right. And connection for you. Right. It's so individualized. And that brings me to the second idea of, you could be in a marriage, but you could be so lonely. And I think many women or even men might struggle with this, where they came to a relationship, but then they're questioning, why do I feel so lonely?
Right. So then it's like kind of like the person isn't getting what they need from it.
Mm-hmm. Right. Or their expectations of what they thought the marriage would bring them is not. Right. I mean, I know that many times people will go into a marriage expecting their spouse to be their best friend. Right. And then they give up on their friends. Right. And they give up on their interests, or they'll give up everything because this is the thing that's supposed to make you feel less lonely. Right. But with marriage can come loneliness. And I think, like, you know, if I would say, like, if loneliness was a sign, I think what the sign would be is go out and connect. Right. I feel lonely, so it's not like, oh, go out and be depressed, or there's something wrong with me that I'm lonely, or I need medication because I'm lonely, or what am I doing wrong because I'm lonely? It's like, you are lonely, go out and connect. Right. Connect to yourself, connect to others,
Right.
connect to items, connect to community.
I think sometimes there is maybe a little bit of exploration that's needed if you are doing those things. If you're already engaging in meaningful activities or meaningful people and you're lonely, then it's like, okay, what's not serving you anymore? Is the people not as fulfilling or as meaningful as you thought it was? Is the
Right.
work or your afternoon activities not as meaningful? So then try something new.
Right. Yeah. What worked once might not work in
Right.
the future again. And so that's what I love about emotions. And I feel like, I emphasize this a lot is emotions are your guide to life.
Right.
It tells you what you need. It tells you what's going on with yourself. And the more you understand your emotions, the more you can navigate your life to feel more in sync with
Right.
yourself and with everything that's going on in you.
Yeah. It's really nice.
So, there's just like there's another piece of what I call the loneliness cycle that I see people getting trapped in, where they'll feel lonely and then they don't know what to do with that lonely. So they feel like they're not sure if they should solve it or if they should bring it to other people. And instead they just sit and do nothing and they
Right.
say, I'm going to wait until it passes. And sometimes that works and it does pass. Other times, though, it doesn't pass.
Right.
It sits with them and then they're reinforcing the loneliness. So the typical cycle is that people will feel lonely. They then see their surroundings. Their surroundings don't know what to do with the loneliness, or
Right.
it feels like a burden, or it feels too heavy, or it's like, don't worry, you'll feel less lonely tomorrow, or they become more hopeful. And then the individual who feels lonely feels misunderstood and they feel invalidated because it denies their emotional experience
Right.
of loneliness. Or, right, if we're talking about lonely, you need connection or understanding and the person isn't giving it to you, then you feel completely misunderstood. After that, the other person gets angry because they feel like, I'm trying to help you. You're not receiving the help. And so if you're not receiving the help, what can I do for you more?
Right.
And so then they end up pulling back. And then the individual, what happens is that because they're isolated and because they were rejected or they feel not understood, they then go back to feeling lonely.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that reinforces it. And I think that cycles people a lot in that loneliness and they don't break out of it.
Right. I think that cycle that you just said can kind of apply for anything. When you're going through something and a helper's trying to help you and then you're not doing what they are telling you to do, so then they step away.
Mm-hmm.
So we see that cycle a lot, which is as a helper to be mindful of like not getting so invested so that way you can still be there for your friend and you're not isolating them when they need you the most. But with loneliness, it's not about necessarily someone else giving us advice and telling us to do. It's about us connecting to what is it that's driving this loneliness, so then I can find the right antidote for it.
So if you are with somebody who is telling you that they're lonely or you sense that they're lonely, rather than solving their loneliness, maybe
Right.
recognizing they need a relationship,
Right.
right? They need you to be with them. They need you to be speaking. They need you to be connecting to the areas that they're passionate about.
Yeah.
But if you are lonely, also to recognize, how do you heal it with another person? Like sometimes I laugh because if someone told me once, like, I was feeling lonely, so I went over and I told them, I told someone else, like, I'm feeling so lonely, and they kept talking about how lonely they were. And it's like, talking about loneliness is not going to make you less lonely. It's just
Right.
going to frustrate the person. They're going to feel like, I don't know what to do with this.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
so instead of like talking about the loneliness, sometimes we have to trust that we can talk about other things that will then get rid of the loneliness,
Right.
rather than hyper focusing on, I'm lonely, I'm lonely, I'm lonely. Or you see it with anxiety or with depression. I'm anxious, I'm anxious, I'm anxious, I'm anxious. And it's like, can we talk about something else so therefore we can help the anxiety? Because
Right.
talking about the anxiety is not going to get rid of it.
Right.
So we should try to like avoid getting stuck in that mindset also of just hyper focusing and obsessing over discussing lonely.
Right. And just kind of accept that it's a part of us and we all feel it at certain points.
Yeah.
And then find the antidote that works for you, whether it's connection, whether it's belonging, whether it's an individual level or a community level, but finding the thing that you need to help you kind of feel less of it in
Right.
the moment.
And then not to feel embarrassed, because photography is not embarrassing.
No, I'm sorry if I made you feel that way. I'm going to join you in the library.
I'll have a second
20
young
years,
40 person
years.
with me. Do you even have a library card?
Yes, I'm a big library person. I love books. I haven't gone in a while. But I actually took one time my children, they have like afternoon activities for kids, like groups also. So I took them there once to like singing or whatever
Yeah.
they had.
It happens to be that while the photography class was going on, there was another group, and it was like middle-aged women all sitting there. And I was thinking, what group is that? I want to join that one also. And then it was like a third grade mother PTA.
Oh, that's funny. I feel like I've seen things for like cheer yoga and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if somebody's feeling lonely in this moment, our advice to you
Join us
is
at the library.
go to your local library and join third grade PTA.
You never know.
Exactly. All right. Well, thank you so much.
This was fun.
Yeah.
We'll see you all next week.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.